Good morning, Liberty. We are live. It is Monday morning, November 26th, 9:30 a.m. Pacific time here on the West Coast. My name is Michael Bolden, broadcasting to you live from here in my home office and studio here in downtown Los Angeles. So good morning to you, or good afternoon, good evening, whenever you happen to be watching, whether you're watching us live or in the archives. I'm very grateful for you being here out in the live chat. Hi to Ward Lawrence, Matt Hugh, Wee Todd, Scouse Jack, awesome. Matt Hughes smashed the flu. That's good. You see, hitting that like button not only helps us, but if you happen to be sick as we're getting into winter, it helps clears that up for you too. So, of course, before we get going, a reminder, if you like what we're doing, you enjoy this show, make sure, or at least if you find it interesting enough to watch, smash that like button, because doing so helps us spread the word. It seems like a small thing, but it is a big deal. So it is leaving comments. Hello to States Rights Gist. First live video. Awesome. Thank you for being here. I love doing it live and being able to chat with people as we're going. And hi to EHP training, cold in Alabama. I'm sure it is, and I don't want to rub it in, guys, but if you're in a cold climb, I was complaining about the weather this morning when I got up and it was in the mid-50s. It's going to be 74 here in LA, so I guess I'll probably survive. I did move from Wisconsin to Southern California in the mid-90s because we had a winter there that was, I think the high temperature for the week was minus 26 below zero. I was in college at the time, and I'm like, man, I am done with this. There is no way to do that anymore. So I know a lot of people get cold, but Wisconsin cold is a whole nother thing. It's warm in the Democratic People's Republic of New Jersey, says Matt Hugh. That's a good way to put it. So today I want to talk about some surveillance. We had done a report, one of our shows last week, on automated license plate readers, these ALPRs, through a report and a series of tweets that we saw over on the EFF, Electronic Frontier Foundation, Twitter account. And as far as privacy-related issues, my organization, 10th Amendment Center, we work with a lot of different organizations on narrow-focused issues. On surveillance is one of them. We'll work with the ACLU, which I did a show about last week, being really just confused about the nature of federal power. But when they're actually taking a good approach on opposing violations of the Fourth Amendment or mass surveillance, or helping us, and vice versa, getting state-level pro-privacy legislation passed that also undermines the federal surveillance state, then, of course, we're going to work with them on that because we want to get stuff done. One of the few organizations that I find very little that is kind of outside the realm of what I like as a person and in my goals, there are some issues, and someone mentioned net neutrality. I have to kind of dig into that too, is EFF, Electronic Frontier Foundation. Why I think they tend to be so good is because they're focused on one thing that they're really good at, and they're not trying to turn into a Democratic Party lobbying firm like others that shall not be named. Hi to the Gold Standard with Alan Mosley. If you guys have not seen my show on that recently, or Mike Meharry, our National Communications Director, he was just on there as well. Check them out over on YouTube. Alan Mosley is a pretty decent guy who happens to like my shirt in the comments. And nice weather down in Miami, says States Rights Gist. Okay, so enough rambling from me today. Of course, if you're enjoying this, smash the like. Let's talk about surveillance. So today I want to talk about Stingray surveillance. There are so many different devices that EFF has actually created what they call a street-level surveillance guide. And it goes through, and it's basically like the landing page for all these different types of surveillance technologies, whether it's biometric DNA scans, retinal scanners, facial recognition, ALPRs, Stingrays, drones, red light cameras, which run all kinds of things, and the like. And Stingrays is the one that I want to kind of focus on today, what they are, how they're used, the data sharing. If you really want to understand the data sharing more than anything, the episode that I did last week on automated license plate readers really goes over that in more detail. Basically, a local law enforcement agency will get one of these devices, generally gifted to them by the federal government, or a grant to purchase only those devices. Then they collect all kinds of data on a very granular local level, and then they share the information, and the entire country has it. So if you pass a stop sign in Cudahy, Wisconsin, at the corner of Merrill and Dale, where I happen to grow up, which is just a residential tract home neighborhood, and there is a license plate reader there or a cop with one driving by that is scanning everything as they go, then just about every major law enforcement agency in the country, state, local, and federal, will know where you were or can tap into that. So Honolulu Police will have that. The ATF will have that. The DEA has that. ICE has that. The Milwaukee Police, the Denver Police, all of it. So that's basically how it goes. It's collected locally, very granular, and then shared all around. And the same is going to go for these Stingray devices. So if you're watching on the video, whether it's here live on YouTube or later on in the archive through Facebook or BitChute or Brighteon, or keyport.tv. I'm not sure if we're still posting there. I'm not sure if they're still active, but I like the interface, so hopefully they last. Or if you're watching those videos, you'll be able to see this here in a moment. If not, I guess you're just going to have to Google image it. Just look for Stingray device. It's a brand name, so let me pull this up. So this is the Stingray 2. It's made by the Harris Corporation, which is generally a military contractor. It's the second generation of this device. Stingray is a brand name. Most people call these devices Stingrays. They really are cell site simulators or IMSI catchers, IMSI catchers. And Harris Corporation is just one of many. They happen to be the main provider of these. They work very closely with the FBI and the Department of Justice in determining who gets these and the kind of deals that go with it. So this is what they look like. It is, I don't know. I've never held one. Mind you, no one wanted anyone to know that these exist. And once they got leaked, we know about them. The general public probably does not, outside of maybe including them in some TV shows. I was watching a Walking Dead episode recently, and there was another brand's version of these in a recent episode a few weeks ago. I also saw a couple of years ago in a show called Homeland, which I think is a very pro-anti-terrorism kind of big surveillance state kind of TV show, kind of just getting the masses comfortable with all kinds of stuff, had one of these Stingray devices. They didn't really talk about it, but there it was. And I'm like, oh man, they're just trying to make the technology seem kind of normalized to the general public, that they can just collect everyone's data. But we'll go over how it works. So Harris is one of the companies that makes these cell site simulators. It's maybe a foot wide and 5-6 inches high. It's just a rectangular kind of a rack mount thing. If you ever use musical equipment and seen like maybe amplifiers or compressors or things like that, it's basically a rack mount size item, 1.5 probably. And you just pop that into a vehicle, and it probably runs on battery or on the car battery. Or it has its own battery pack. They cost anywhere from $60,000 to $120,000, which is why most average people aren't purchasing these. It's generally governments through federal grants, because local governments really don't have any money either. I mean, the federal government, as an aside, doesn't have any of its own money. They're stealing it all from us, but what they're doing is they're stealing it from us, sending it to a bureaucracy, giving a bunch of people of jobs with that money, overpaid, probably a lot of pencil pushers. For example, a third of the ATF just sits around doing administration. And then they divvy it back to the local law enforcement in order so the local community is hearing, oh, well, the federal government is handing money to your local law enforcement to help keep you safe from terrorism. Well, part of how they do that is they buy up all these Stingray devices from Harris and many other corporations and protect us from the bad guys. So let's go over to EFF. EFF, I should get to the top of this article, has this page on cell site simulators. If you're watching live, the link should be, I should actually ask, are the links there? Because I'm posting them in my Wirecast program, and I wasn't certain how to do that up until a few weeks ago when Idamon recommended, you really should do this, so I just went for it. So hopefully in the YouTube live chat, in the description of the video, that should be there, not necessarily in the chat. And if you're not watching live and you're going to our website, 10thamendmentcenter.com/goodmorningliberty, where you find the archive of all of our shows, it will be posted with every single blog update with the videos, all the alternate links to the other platforms, the iTunes and Google Play subscription links, and the audio-only version where you can download or listen through a player or through our website. But we should put all those links on there. States Rights Gist says in the chat, links are there. Excellent. So if you want to follow along, EFF has these. You won't see, when you're watching the video, you see I highlight it. That's just a local app on my Google Chrome. And a lot of times on some of the more mainstream websites, there's tons of ads, just junk ads. I like advertisement when I happen to be looking for something and I find a discount on it. I'm fine with that. I understand that businesses need to advertise to reach new customers, so I'm not just an anti-corporate type of person. But some of these websites, I guess they're so desperate in trying to figure out how to monetize their properties, their kind of archaic properties that are now in the internet age, that they just are blasting tons of unrelated bad ads. So I use an ad blocker as well when I do the show here, and EFF has no problem with this, but some of these sites, I literally am just blocking out every 2 sections because there's so many on there. So it'll look a little bit different sometimes when you're watching the video than maybe when you're clicking through yourself. So let's review this. EFF, cell site simulators, also known as Stingrays or IMSI catchers, are devices that masquerade as legitimate cell phone towers. So this tiny device, well, it's not tiny, but in relation to a cell phone tower, it's really small, tricks phones within a certain radius into connecting to the device rather than the tower. So all you need to do is drive around in your cop car, your vehicle, set it up in a high-rise or an apartment building, and every device within a specific range, depending on the device and how it's tuned as well, will connect to the Stingray device, which then relays the information to the cell tower. So that way, they're automatically spoofing the cell tower. So all the cell phones really think they're just having a normal path through the tower-to-tower service. You send a text, it goes from your phone, it goes to a tower, it goes to another data center, and it gets to the end user after a few more hops, probably. They add an extra hop, so then they're picking up all the info. EFF says law enforcement use cell site simulators to pinpoint the location of phones with greater accuracy than phone companies. So phone companies, through their GPS, they can give you a range of where they are. And I went to an event over the weekend in an art gallery where this guy, known as Invader, he's a French artist that puts these kind of street art pieces of Space Invader guys all over the place, especially here in LA. And he was doing, he set one up in a balloon and it came down. He was using his cell phone to try to track it. He had a tracker on this little piece of art, a creative thing. But he couldn't find it because the cell phone was relocating all the GPS signals to the closest road. So it actually had landed a couple hundred meters away in an open field in South Florida. Well, I guess it was some kind of a swamp. So he couldn't find it, even though he was there over and over and back and forth up this road. But then he learned from his cell phone provider that they actually move the direction of where the pinpoints are. So people are always following roads. So cell site simulators don't do stuff like that. And they actually just give you a very accurate, specific location. They also log IMSI numbers. Those are the unique identifying numbers. So if you have a MAC address on your laptop, for example, that's the unique identifier for your device. So once they have that identifier is associated with your name, then anything that device does is now associated with you. So they get those unique identifying numbers of all the mobile devices within a given area. Some cell site simulators may have advanced features allowing law enforcement to intercept communications or even alter the content of communication. So we'll get into that in a little bit more detail shortly. And here's the interesting part. I had mentioned that you really don't know. So the average person making a phone call, sending a text, connecting to a data service, whatever, there's no way they're going to know that this happened. There's no way they're going to know that they're being caught up in a surveillance sweep of their area. In a place where I live, and I know some people will tell me, dude, you're making a choice to live where you do. And I do. But in a place where I live, in a huge metropolitan area, in the middle of a city, I'm probably always being caught up in one of these. You just have to assume that there's always these devices being used. Now, in a rural area, small towns, maybe not so much. When you see red light cameras, though, They may have automated license plate readers. They may also have a Stingray device attached to it, or maybe some kind of a combo that we're not aware of yet. So EFF notes that it is, quote, difficult for most people to know whether or not their phone signals have been accessed by an active cell site simulator. And it is impossible for anyone to know if their phone signals have been accessed by a passive IMSI catcher. You can read through this article to get the differences between the two. It's interesting stuff. They also note that apps for identifying the use of cell site simulators, such as Snoop Snitch, may not be verifiably accurate. So if EFF can't verify that there are apps which have been made to identify these things, they can't verify if they're accurate or not. You got to be pretty sure that big money Harrison Corporation getting tons of cash from the feds, they probably have figured out how to spoof. If they can spoof a cell phone tower, they can definitely spoof some dude's app. You'd think. Because what they do is they hire, you get some really intelligent or incredible app developer. Well, one person might be really, really good at that. Well, Harris probably hires 200 of them, and then they all work together, and you really maximize the ability of what that company can do. So let's look at some of the data that cell site simulators collect. Data collected by cell site simulators, again, this is from the EFF report, can reveal intensely personal information about anyone who carries a phone, whether or not they have been ever suspected of a crime. Now, mind you, we covered on this show last week. Well, maybe it was 2 weeks ago. I think it was last week. I hope everyone had a great Thanksgiving. Sometimes it's hard to get back into the groove of things. So in the last week or so, I did a show about ALPRs, license plate readers. And EFF has been doing these basically public information, public records requests. They got about 200 law enforcement agencies around the country to give them the information that they needed. A lot of it was redacted. We found out who they shared the data with. But we figured out, they added it up, that it was 2 billion scans of license plates, knowing where people are over a 2-year period. And 99.5% of them were never, the suspect of a crime while they were being scanned. So we can use that as kind of a guide with these localized mass surveillance technologies. So if license plate readers are just scooping up everybody, and that results in 99.5% of people being caught up in a system, being surveilled by for their location for the crime of driving. Crime, and I'm putting in quotes. We can assume that it's going to be a pretty bad number like that as well for cell site simulators. So going on, EFF notes, once your cellular device has connected to a cell site simulator, the simulator can determine your location and read identifying data such as IMSI or ESN numbers. Those are the numbers from your devices, or if you've ever looked at the back and you had to set up a new SIM card, a lot of times you'll have to enter that ESN code. That's the way the manufacturer or the provider knows what phone that you're using, how to connect and provide you service based on what you pay, and of course, so law enforcement can track exactly where you are. It can also intercept metadata, such as information about calls made and the amount of time on each call, the content of unencrypted phone calls and text messages, the full content, if it's unencrypted, the full content of unencrypted phone calls and text messages, and some types of data usage, like websites visited. Now listen to this. This is where I think it gets pretty juicy. Not that this isn't already. Additionally, marketing materials produced by manufacturers of cell site simulators indicate that they can be configured to divert calls and text messages, edit messages, and even spoof the identity of a caller in text messages and calls. If you want to set somebody up, frame somebody, what better way than to get a whole series of fake messages sent from someone's account, or a real text message, but then adding a few words. I'm sure there's some kind of algorithm that if they targeted somebody, that they could add all kinds of junk to people things. The marketing materials from the companies are saying, we can spoof this. You can send messages from whatever device you want and make it look like it came from this other person. Can you imagine sending threats or do sexting, whatever you want to embarrass somebody or get somebody convicted of a crime, they can do this kind of stuff. And the companies who are making it, they're advertising this as a feature to law enforcement. That tells me a lot. First of all, law enforcement can't be trusted if they are looking for this kind of device that can do this kind of thing, or if they're willing to do this. Now, I know someone can probably tell me, oh, there's got to be some ways where there's probably some ways where they want to, they're working on a crime syndicate and they found a way, someone's not using a red phone or they're not using Signal encrypted messaging and they want to tell some hitman or something to meet them at such and such a place to go do something, set somebody up and then capture them. Yeah, of course. But again, I go back to the idea that the license plate readers that are supposedly just collecting terrorists or collecting red light violations are scooping up and storing for decades in some situations. They're planning on storing forever. The location data of people, 99.5% of the time, have nothing to do with a crime. So they're really not using this for crime. Basically, they're using this for everybody, and then every now and then it accidentally seems to catch a criminal or be used to catch a criminal, and then they advertise we're using this to catch criminals when it's really the other way around. Denver Libertarian notes that Denver PD has been using these for a few years, but recently installed a permanent license plate reader at one specific intersection. At least I know to avoid that location. Yeah, the license plate readers are bad. The Stingrays are bad. They can mount both of these on drones, and the drones tend to be much more advanced. Like the Houston PD got a number of drones from the Department of Homeland Security. They're way more advanced than the type that you buy on Amazon on Cyber Monday for a discount. Scouse Jack calls it EFU, Evidence Fabrication Unit. Yeah, absolutely. So they're collecting all this information. They know where you are, who you are, what you're doing, what websites you're visiting, who you're talking to, etc. We can think of all kinds of bad ways that can be used. They can also spoof and fake messages from you, which is even worse. And then, interestingly enough, up until a few years ago, they kept it totally secret. EFF notes that the use of cell site simulators have been shrouded in government secrecy. Police have used cell site simulators to track location data without a warrant by deceptively obtaining pen register orders from courts without explaining the true nature of their surveillance. They also tried to keep the use of cell site simulators secret from not just the public, but also the court system, withholding information from defense attorneys and judges, likely due to non-disclosure agreements with Harris Corporation. So Harris Corporation puts together an NDA, and the report came from ARS Technica a couple of years ago. I did not put this in the notes, but I'm going to paste it here in the chat so you guys want to check it out. The title of the article is FBI Really Doesn't Want Anyone to Know About Stingray Use by Local Cops. This was from October 2nd or February 10th, 2015, so a little over 3 years ago. There's a letter. You can click into it. A letter that was leaked to the Minneapolis Star-Tribune in December 2014 that basically Harris Corporation tells whoever they sell this to. Well, let me just read this. It's almost insane. In the event that the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension receives a request pursuant to the Freedom of Information Act or an equivalent state or local law, the civil or criminal discovery process or judicial, legislative, or administrative process to disclose information concerning the Harris Corporation Stingray device, the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension will immediately notify the FBI of any such request telephonically and in writing in order to allow sufficient time for the FBI to seek to prevent disclosure through appropriate channels. And you can click through and see the link to the actual letter. So what are they saying? Okay, I buy something from Harris Corporation, and Harris Corporation tells me that when I purchase this, they have a deal with the FBI that I'm not allowed to disclose that I use this. So if there's a smart attorney that finds out in discovery somehow, and this will happen, they do find these things. Otherwise, they wouldn't have this type of an NDA. They're concerned about this. So if some smart defense attorney figures out that information was collected illegally, that is without a warrant and in a sweeping manner of mass surveillance like this, then it's going to come out in court. So what are you supposed to do? Law enforcement agency then actually will do some kind of, their attorneys, the prosecutor will probably go through some motions to slow things down, maybe delay a hearing. Then they let the FBI know what's going on. Then the FBI steps in. And we've actually seen, and I think it was up in Seattle, there was another one of these NDAs, which basically said, instead of revealing that you're using the Stingray device, you should just withdraw from the case and lose. I think their mentality is that they don't think too many people are going to figure out that this is happening. And they're probably right about that. So they would rather just lose the case in the few times that they find out about this rather than talk about the chain of command, that FBI is partnering with corporations to provide devices to local law enforcement to conduct mass illegal surveillance and share that surveillance with everybody, building profiles on basically every human being. Ward Lawrence says, can they detect whether or not you're carrying a gun? Well, I do know that some of the surveillance cameras, and we've seen some reports, and I should do a show on this because I really enjoy covering the surveillance on this, because really, our organization at 10th Amendment Center, we do a lot of work on privacy and surveillance. Mike Meharry is probably the expert on this as far as our team goes. I'm pretty decent. I like doing these episodes because I'm digging through the documents further and learning more and more. So if you guys are learning stuff, I can assure you I'm also learning things as I go through this. So as like yesterday, as I'm reading through the EFF report, I'm looking at this letter, I'm learning more and more about it. It's making me smarter for my activism as well. Ward asks if they can, so again, can they detect whether or not you're carrying a gun? We know that a lot of the facial recognition type cameras, not only, so they're trying to get around the idea of people covering their faces. There was a guy who tried to make a law in Georgia where you banned covering your face in the public. Ostensibly, this was to stop Muslim terrorists. But I think the real reason is to stop people from hiding from government prying eyes. So you have to watch out for whenever they're protecting us from terrorism, what they're really going to do with it down the line. For example, I know a lot of people are probably in favor of a wall on the southern border. I don't want one because if it could actually work, which I don't think it could, if they could actually work, where is that going to be used? That's also used to keep people in. So walls work both directions when they do work. So I think if you look at the bigger picture, what could a dangerous government official do, even if a good person, good and politician is kind of an oxymoron, but let's say there's good politicians that want to use a tool today. I think if you're not thinking how a bad one could use it in the future, you're really selling things short, and it's a dangerous approach. So can they detect whether you're carrying a gun? I know they can absolutely detect your gait. They've gotten to the point where they can identify people based on how they walk. So even if you're covering your face, you've got a bandana like some Antifa person, well, they can just monitor, zoom out a little bit and say, okay, well, that's that person. I know how they're walking. Well, the algorithm tells them that. So could they figure out if you're carrying a gun? I don't know. I think open carry, clearly, right? Concealed? I guess it depends how good the device is. I don't know. I really don't know. But I'm assuming at some point they're going to want to develop this kind of things. I just have not seen anything like that. It's a really good question because, of course, concealed carry is extremely important. I'm a big fan, even though I'm horrible with firearms, and I'm starting to learn how to be better with them because I think it's important to be trained on these things. I'm a big fan of open carry strategically because I guess if people, the idea being, if you don't know who's carrying, someone might be and some might not, then that's what is the deterrent. And I guess concealed carry fits that. Maybe someone can enlighten me. Robert Sanderson makes a good point. Until you take the incentive away, you can't build a wall big enough to overcome these incentives. True, and they're very good at tunneling from Mexico. There's tons of movies about that. If you ever watched Narcos, I heard that along the San Diego-Tijuana border that there's some danger of seismic activity because there are so many tunnels. just makeshift ones that they makeshift in that they don't care if they last 20 years or 100 years, that they last for a year or two and then collapse. Becomes very dangerous over there. So in other words, again, back to the Stingray devices, they're telling law enforcement to lose cases in court rather than telling people what's going on. And that's how bad it is. So can it actually be stopped? Well, the number one thing to do, and if you look at our 2017 State of the Nullification Movement report, we're going to be updating that in the next probably 4 to 6 weeks for the current year. We've covered on page 37 is where you can go to at 10thamendmentcenter.com/report how some states are taking action on this. Because if the biggest danger is, well, first of all, the biggest danger is using the devices and collecting them in the first place. They're already out there. They're ubiquitous. So we would like to see them totally banned from use because they can't be used. You can't use them. And I mean, I guess, can you target one person? I'm not certain. But a number of states have taken action to require a warrant for their use and to prevent the sharing of the data all over the place, because that's where it gets crazy. If they're not using a warrant based on probable cause, and then once they collect it, then every law enforcement agency, state, federal, and local has access to it, then you create this kind of nationwide law enforcement blob, which is not supposed to exist in a federal system. So a number of states have started taking action to restrict their use. California and Louisiana back in 2015. Surprisingly enough, California was really the first one. EFF worked very hard on that. They're based in San Francisco. It makes sense that they have some influence. So California led the way on that. The most sweeping one went into effect early last year, January 2017, in Illinois. Mike Meharry wrote this part, and he says, the law prohibits the use of Stingrays except to identify, locate, or track the location of a communications device, and it requires a warrant. This bars police from listening to conversations or accessing phone data. Even for location tracking, officers must get a warrant, blah, blah, blah. And then in 2017, Doug Ducey in Arizona, who's generally pretty bad on a lot of stuff, he signed a decent small step forward requiring Stingray spying use. So it requires police to get a search warrant based on probable cause before deploying a Stingray to locate or track an electronic device. Now, I'm not sure if they can pinpoint a specific device, so I should actually learn a little bit more about that, but they're starting to require warrants on a state level. And then if you think about it, if they're not collecting everybody's information and they're only collecting someone that they're targeting, then that 99.5% stop getting swept up or it gets reduced. And then on top of it, some of these, so for example, the California Electronic Data Privacy or Electronic Communications Privacy Act that we supported along with EFF, ACLU, and a number of other groups, it also cuts back on data sharing. So they can't just pass it along to everybody willy-nilly. And so then the whole story, the link, the connecting it all, Honolulu police or Cudahy local police in Milwaukee doesn't need to have access to Stingray device information collected by a warrant in Southern California. Washington State and New Hampshire also passed similar laws in 2017. So a handful of states are starting to move the bar forward on this. We would like to see them all strengthened, but it's starting the ball rolling. And then I also wanted to point out two bills. This might be of interest to Ward. Pretty sure, down in Texas. Two bills, House Bill 352 and House Bill 353. Were introduced that would require a search warrant before deploying Stingray. They were introduced by Representative Cesar Blanco of El Paso. And the interesting thing about these two bills, they work in tandem. So either one passing would be positive. Together would be the best. They also have a feature in 352 that specifically bans the sharing of data collected. If they're going to use this with a warrant as required, they can't just hand the information off to federal agencies. Because even if they're getting a warrant, then you still can't trust that whatever data they're collecting, they're saying, well, we don't have it anymore. We passed it along to Washington, D.C. So these are very good bills that were pre-filed for the 2019 legislative session in Texas. We will be monitoring for other states that are doing this in the near future. A lot of the pre-filing for 2019 starts in December, and then the legislative sessions start pretty heavily in early January. So we'll be covering that. I'll let you guys know. And if you are subscribed to our email list at 10thamendmentcenter.com/register, once information for your state starts getting out there, some bills filed, whether it's on Stingrays or asset forfeiture or stopping gun control, whatever it may be, we do send out action alerts on select bills. We can't cover everything because there's oftentimes hundreds of them, but we'll send out action alerts on select bills to let people know this bill is up for a committee hearing. Who do you need to call? There are 5 people you need to call to help get this passed. And sometimes it only takes 10 or 15 people to move a piece of legislation forward. So hopefully you found this interesting. You found it insightful. You learned something. I'm definitely learning as I go here. I hope you had a wonderful Thanksgiving and your Monday morning is off to a good start. I really appreciate spending some time with me today. Of course, if you are enjoying the show and you're still watching especially, make sure to smash that like button. I appreciate everyone leaving comments here. Ward Lawrence, EHP Training, Scouse Jack, States Rights, Gist, Alan Mosley, awesome man, good to see you. Wee Todd, I probably missed a couple people. Denver Libertarian. I appreciate everyone who's been joining me today, and Crazy Danish Hacker who just joined in. This will be stored in the archives. You might find it interesting. It's a cool screen name. So we're covering Stingray surveillance, cell site simulator surveillance. Again, I hope you found it insightful. Make sure to smash that like and share the link to the video with other people to help get the information out. And we'll be back here as we are now on a regular schedule every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 9:30 a.m. Pacific time. We'll see you in a couple of days. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day.